And I see that we are living on this kind of cursed earth. We are longing for what is to come. And in a lot of ways, for me, my grief reminds me of what is to come, that fullness, that wiping away of every tear I've ever had that I get to look forward to whilst I endure on earth, but I don't actually endure it alone.
This is the After Dinner Mint, a podcast of stories I tell you at dinner. Think of the mint as the stories you tell after you've been kicked out of the restaurant, holding your mint, standing in the street, telling more honest stories with your friends than you did at the table. It's not a sermon. It's not advice. It's not self-help. We're processing what we're learning about faith and life, honestly, in community, to encourage you to do that with your God and your community.
Hello, welcome back to the latest episode of the After Dinner Mint. And today we are talking about why do the sads feel so sad? However, before we get into the topic on grief and loss, we thought we would just introduce ourselves a little bit. So you have a bit of a sense of who's actually talking to you. And if we have any expertise on these subjects that we're discussing, which I would like to reiterate that we do not claim to be experts on any of these topics. And this podcast is purely meant to be what would happen if you were hanging out with your friends late at night when the conversation flows a bit better and you're able to really talk about where you're at and what you might think about things. So we're not here to give you advice. We're not here to give you a theological position. However, we are speaking from our own experiences as Christian women in society leading very different lives. So why don't we get started? Actually, I'm going to throw to you, Bec. Can you introduce yourself? What's your background? What's your work history been? Why are you here?
Why am I here? Excellent. So my name is Bec. I am trained as a clinical psych. So my background is I've worked in child protection, prisons, homeless shelter, child trauma services, hospitals, all the really sad places. I've worked there. Yeah. And I'm also the founder of Stories I Tell You at Dinner.
Yeah. Maddy, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, guys. I'm Maddy. I trained as a speech pathologist, but left that to do ministry. And so I'm currently almost to the end of my Masters of Divinity at Trinity, which has been a big journey. And I'm almost there. I can see the end in sight. I'm really excited to be there and excited to dig into more ministry stuff soon.
Are you already working in ministry, Maddy? Or when you finish, will you look for a job in ministry?
I've done a number of years already and I effectively left my ministry job to train in ministry. It was like, oh, what do you want after this degree? I was like, the job that I already had. But no. So hopefully go into a ministry position, or I'd also happily work at a parachurch organisation and encourage people, or just volunteer at my church and lead a Bible study or something like that. However the Lord calls me to use.
Amazing.
Parenting my children, that also is a thing that I need to do.
Yes. Yeah, that takes up a lot of time. And my name is Brittany. I am an accredited mental health social worker, which basically just means I provide therapy to, at the moment, it's young people and young adults with complex trauma and marginalisation and perhaps reasons that they can't receive services in kind of the mainstream system. And I have worked there on and off for a number of years. I've done some work in private practice as well, providing therapy. And prior to that, worked in headspace centres, hospital, specifically with young people. I was a school chaplain at the very start of my career, worked in local government, lots of different jobs. Basically have kind of worked at the pointy end of mental health for a long time now, providing therapy and hopefully some hope to the young people that I have been working with. And many moons ago, I did do 1 year of theology training. And I remember I always toy with studying, but it never really got there.
I feel like doing stories, I'm like, I want to do theology training. And I'm like, no more study. But now everyone has theology training. Like, maybe it's a trap. No, I'm kidding. It's pretty helpful. I have zero theology training. We've read a little bit. Sorry, Britt.
Yeah.
But get us on track.
So today, really what we're talking about is grief and loss. And not just in the sense of somebody close to me has died, that sort of grief. We are thinking a bit more, expanding our thinking on that to really encompass grief and loss in the sense of as we go through life stages, transitions, the grief of even like finishing up with a job, starting a new one, the grief of changing into motherhood, the grief of perhaps not being able to have children, the grief of even leaving singlehood for marriage or not marrying, whatever the life stage you might be in, we all kind of experience grief and loss as part of the human experience, I would say. And so we really want to deep a little bit about that. And I guess one of the places this came from is what I have found in providing therapy over the years is there's this kind of inherent human fear of grief, of either pretending it's not happening, like, no, I don't care. I don't mind that happened. I find that a lot as a trauma response. When people have experienced significant difficulties, they'll say, it's fine. I just got over it. I worked through that, as if they somehow managed to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, versus really kind of succumbing to grief and loss and feeling incredibly victimized by it and feeling like things are really unfair in their life, versus kind of sitting with it. But most people, I find, don't particularly have natural skills in sitting with difficult emotions, myself included. I think it's part of the human experience. But we really want to think about, as a Christian, what does it actually mean for us to experience grief? How do we acknowledge it? How can we make sense of it? So I'm going to throw to you, Maddy, and I want to ask you, how would you define grief?
Yeah, and I want to add to that intro as we kind of process grief, but also as we sit beside people who process grief. Yeah, we want to think about that too. Grief is like that idea of having a loss of some sort, whether that be a tangible loss, something that is visible to others around us, a loss of a loved one, a loss of function in our body of some sort, or something intangible, which is what you were describing before, that idea of losing a stage of life that you enjoyed, or losing a certain freedom, or even just a loss of income, or a piece of our potentially where we put our identity, that actually sometimes God uses that kind of loss as, hey, you're not putting your identity in me. But, there's different things that we could experience as a grief that are not as visible to other people. And I think there's that intense sorrow that comes with it, it affects us like physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Is there anything else that you guys would add to that?
You're talking, I was like, man, Maddy is so articulate. Maddy's took all my answers. Oh, no. I was just like, all I had was grief is not just death. Grief is like a loss of something, but I love how you specified that. So I don't feel like I have that much to add to that one.
I appreciate the simplicity of it's not just it's not just this, it's that. But yes, yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Well, and I think as you were talking, the thing that really came up for me was aging. Even now at 38, there are things that I can't do that I used to be able to do at 20. And I've started noticing it. I'm like, oh, I'm aging. Okay, I have to adjust to this. And so much of our society is geared towards not aging, either by completely reversing the signs that you might be aging through aesthetics, and or just like being able to do everything, being as fit as you possibly can. And so there is like this broader sense of grief and loss that we kind of go little by little as we go through life, that as we start to lose things. And in a lot of ways, I think it makes us consider, I hope, as Christians, what is our worth actually in? Is it in our capacity, our ability, our relationships, the external stuff, or is it in our relationship with Christ?
Just as you were talking, it did remind me of this sermon I heard Rory Shana give years and years and years ago. And I don't even remember the actual thing that he was talking, like the actual passage. But what he talked about was like that sense of growing older, those choices that you've made start to close off as well, where he was like, look, I'm Rory, I'm married to Susan, we have 4 boys, we've had the children that we're going to have. I'm a pastor at this church, other people might leave this church and go on to do things. He's like, but I'm going to stay here. And I remember being like, yes, at some point your options when you age and mature, they do tend to close. Not that you can never do anything else. You tend to be like, okay, I'm on this path. My body is not doing the things that it used to do. There is that sense of maturity, and with that, like, options close.
Yeah.
It really makes me think of when I was 18, 19, 20 and involved in church. And when that verse, Jeremiah 29:11, like, I alone know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper. And it was like, and then there's now that really famous meme where the Batman guy's like, context, and slapping the face of the person, because it was really used at that point to be like, you could do anything. You can be amazing. You're going to change lives.
Inspirational poster. Yep.
Yeah. And that was the type of church I was in, where it was very like, yes, you can do so many things with your life. And the more I age, the more I'm like, actually, maybe sometimes my life's just really boring. And like, I am stuck in my mundaneness of like, my house needs cleaning all the time. I clean things and then it gets dirty again, and it is boring and I don't love it. Like, am I great right now? Or is that actually the purpose of my life, to be great? Like, what does any of this even mean? But that grief and loss of dreams not even achieved that perhaps you thought you would have in your life as well.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting you say that, because I was chatting to someone in my life who is not a Christian, and they're getting to 10 years off retirement age, but they're almost like always flip-flopping of like, I don't think this is what I want to do with my life. Oh, I never realized this hope of learning this musical instrument. I never realized this. There's just this like, these kind of, it's always coming through as this cycling of like a crisis of, I never did that. I never did that thing. I'm running out of time.
Yeah.
And it's hard. They're like grieving this loss that they also never had. And I think as Christians, we try and think about that. We also go, is that a really important thing to be taking through your life? Or like, do we need to be prioritizing those things? Or do we need to be, how do we bring those things to God when we're grieving a loss in a way? But also recognizing it's okay that we didn't realize that potential. It's just a different worldview, right?
It's a totally different framework to consider it from.
Yeah.
So given, obviously we're defining grief quite broadly as we talk about it today, what would be the signs to you that you're not doing okay in your grief? And it might be helpful to kind of share even perhaps the kind of grief, not full details, but a little bit about maybe the kinds of grief you might have experienced, whether you it's more that direct grief or that broader sense of grief that we're talking about today. I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we talk of, probably one of the ones that sticks out for me is maybe like, so my parents divorced like quite suddenly, maybe 10 years ago. And the thing that really shocked me actually was that it actually was a grief. I think probably like perhaps our family culture, perhaps, world culture. It's just kind of like, oh, well, like you're an adult, I move on. And actually sitting with it and realizing actually I've lost my family, like I've lost my family unit that had been quite close.
Yeah.
Like I think recognizing that it was a grief, which kind of ties in with quite nicely, like for me, ironically, although psychology is my job, or has been, and although it has been my job, I'm ironically not great at dealing with emotions. I'm like, look, that's a feeling. I don't want to deal with that. You like,
it's the therapist lost gradual and secret.
Yeah.
Secret is that they also struggle.
Yes, exactly. But I think the thing that I have learned through like a lot of prayer is actually like that grief goes somewhere. Like just because I don't want to acknowledge it doesn't mean it doesn't go somewhere. So I will find that it will come out in my body. I will notice that like I will get sick. My body will do weird things. Yeah. I'll have a shoulder twitch, whatever. And then I'll notice that I'm like increasingly resentful and irritable and bitter. And the thing is, I've just come to learn that like I cannot let resentment get to me. I cannot let it become bitterness. Like I actually have to deal with things, which ironically means that I have to deal with how I feel and I have to talk to people and be awkward. And like those things suck, but they're not as bad as being really bitter. Like, yeah.
And like bitterness is like a rot, isn't it? It like eats away at like your relationships, at your like heart, and it has like all these other things that it impacts, which we need to deal with those things so we don't become bitter. Yeah, but it's hard to do. It's really uncomfortable. Do you want to share as well?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I guess like last year I obviously already shared about this in my interview podcast. You can listen to episode 1. Just plug it for us. Anyway, I had a pregnancy loss, and it was like really hard to, the nature of what we went through was just, there was this real grief for, in the end, there wasn't actually a pregnancy there. It was effectively a mess, but you're grieving what you realize was never necessarily there, a person that you had thought. And it was just, I remember it was just all consuming. Like my emotions were so big at the time. And then it impacted me in that physical sense of like, there was a tightness in my chest. Like I was anxious at such little things. I felt like I just needed to retreat and be on my own. But then when I was on my own, I felt isolated, and then I wanted to be with people. But there was only select people that you kind of want to be with. And it's really hard to describe, because grief is also just really unpredictable. And as you start kind of processing through it, you have a day that's really good, and then something happens and it just triggers all those feelings come back again. And I think as well, like in a smaller sense, as kind of the grief went on and I was kind of dealing with that in the following months, I was noticing that if I wasn't, those days that I thought I was feeling okay, sometimes all it took is like a few little things and then I'd almost spiral again. But I really had to be open with how I was feeling. So yeah, I had this physical impact. I had like the emotional impact. And then I think spiritually it was like really hard for me to pray. It was just really hard for me to articulate it. And like, it wasn't that I didn't necessarily know God wasn't with me. I just didn't know what to say in my actual grief. Like I didn't know. And that's where like the Psalms were just so helpful, is preaching, like, or reading through the Psalms and getting these words. I think Psalm 22 literally starts with the famous words that Jesus used, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's not actually saying that God has forsaken him. He's saying this is how it feels. This is actually just how it feels, like I'm stuck in my grief and you're not there to help. Keep reading. He does. God's faithfulness is evident through the whole Bible, and you can see that he is with us. But yeah, it was just like I could just see that in my life, how many areas it affected. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have experienced a lot of grief. So I had a miscarriage before I had my first daughter, but probably the major losses for me have been both my parents have died, and at very different stages of my life. So my mum, I must have been 27 when my mum died. And that kind of grief that I experienced, because she received a diagnosis of cancer and then went through a series of treatment, and it was about a year before she died, which is quite quick anyway, but I felt like I really processed that grief. And I wasn't married and had kids. I had a lot of time to kind of make sense of it all. So that year was very hard, but I felt like I lost my mother in stages and grieved that as I went. And then when she died, because she was so unwell at the end, it was almost a relief that she died. And then obviously that grief has continued to play out for me in very different ways as I've gone through different stages. So I got married the following year, and obviously my mum wasn't there. We started having kids. My mum her younger siblings were twins. And so when I had twins, it was like, I want to talk to you. Like when I was preparing to give birth, and even like the antenatal classes, they're like, how long were you breastfed for? They throw that stuff out there, and you're like, I'm like, I have no idea, because I didn't think of any of these things in my 20s. Like I had no concept for having children. So there's been lots of like they're not little griefs, but they are like, it's that continued grief in developmental stages. And I expect that to continue for the rest of my life in a lot of ways, like that I will feel, God willing, I live past the age my mother did. But I know that as I start approaching that age, I will feel that of like, this is what it was like. This is kind of what it might have been like for you to be around this age and to have adult children, and to just all of those stages that you experience different parts of grief, and it grows with you. And so in some ways, I have learnt to see grief as a friend in a way. It's such a weird thing to even try to describe, but it's like a part of me that goes with me and I can't get rid of it. I can't turn away from it. I have to accept it and learn to live with it. And there are things it gives me that I love, and there are things that I don't love about it that continue to crop up at different stages of my life. Grief, in some ways, is a gift from God. I think it's also a reminder, and I remember my husband, when my mum died, was my boyfriend, and he just said to me, this is just so unnatural. Like, we are not meant to be separated from other people. Like, this is just not the way life is meant to be. And I see that we are living on this kind of cursed earth. We are longing for what is to come. And in a lot of ways, for me, my grief reminds me of what is to come, that fullness, that wiping away of every tear I've ever had that I get to look forward to whilst I endure on earth. But I don't actually endure it alone. I endure it with Christ, who totally gets all my suffering and my grief and what separation means in a way that like no human really can. But when my dad then died and I had small kids, that was completely different. So about a year after my dad died, I started seeing a therapist. And the reason I did that is the initial kind of grief for me felt like walking through water. Like, I don't know, top or down. There's actually a quote from C.S. Lewis that really describes it for me. So he wrote a book, A Grief Observed, after his wife died, and I would recommend it to anyone, even just to get an insight into the depth of pain someone can feel. He writes really eloquently about it, and I think still like Christ is central to what he's saying. So it's grief as a Christian. However, it does describe the depth of pain someone does feel. So at other times, it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. There is a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting. Yet I want the others to be about me. I dread the moments when the house is empty. If only they would talk to one another and not to me. So it's like being there but not there. And that's how I felt. I was kind of like in this, okay, I've got the motions of life. Having small kids when you're grieving is really helpful in a lot of ways. Obviously difficult. But what I saw at that time, and I still saw this when my mum died, but not as much so. But when my dad died, it was like God provided all these people who were like, I'm going to take your kids for an hour. Do you just want to go do something? Or I've made you all these meals. Or like the tangible experience of Christ's people, Christian or non-Christian as well. Like I remember a friend being like, what can I do? And I was like, can you just come over? Like, I just can't. I find it hard to just hang out with my kids in the house. Like, she would just come and we wouldn't really chat that much. But it was just like, I just need someone to hang out while I do nothing with my children at my house because I can't get out of the house. I can't do this right now. But I do need help with this parenting or just community side of things. So I think in God's kindness, he is really with us in that. But yeah, the things that told me I wasn't actually going okay, really, I felt like I needed a space to be able to get some of it out. And what the therapist did is they're not solving my grief. They can't take it away. There's no like getting rid of it, but they sat with me in it, which I think Christians can do. And I think we could all do well to learn how to sit with our own emotions and with other people's. But in reality, that's what I paid her to do, to sit with my feelings and be with me in it. And it was so powerful, that experience. And, since then, there have been lots of other ways in which that grief continues to play out. But I don't feel like my experience of grief impacts my functioning in my day-to-day life. But I knew I was like really irritable. I had a short fuse with my kids. I was like, this is not who I want to be. And this grief is kind of pushing into me in a way that's unhelpful now. Whereas since that experience of kind of really not, I guess, contending with it, like sitting with it, for me has allowed it to be a part of my experience, but it's not my whole experience. It doesn't define my identity. It doesn't define my existence, but it is part of my experience on earth. And I don't begrudge that it is that. It just is. It's part of what God has put for me while I'm on earth, that I do experience things like this.
Yeah. Something I noticed while you were talking almost was just that theme of allowing space for grief. Like, yeah, you allowed space for grief. It's almost like when your mum was dying, although it was very hard, you had time to say goodbye and say the things and process, and that kind of really helped. And a thing that really hindered with your dad was that I have really small children and I don't have that space. So almost by making space, by going to therapy, just being like, I need to just sit and give space to what has happened.
Yeah, it felt like I was making an appointment to be sad. Like I was like, cool, this is the hour. I'm going to go. I'm going to cry. I remember the first appointment. I sat down and the woman was like reading my referral and she's like, wow, you've been through a lot. And I was like, just burst into tears. I was like, yes, I have. Like, but it was helpful. Like the sad have to come out. The feelings have to be felt. Like you're meant to just express stuff. And sometimes it's helpful to schedule that in.
Yeah, you had to be really active in actually making space for that, because I think when so many other things fill our lives, we then use them so that we don't have to address it. And then it's like these things bottle up, and it's like someone used the illustration of it, those places where you get steam kind of coming from the ground and there's little cracks and they're like, I don't know what they're called. I don't know, but it's very well. Something like that. But it's like if you throw a pebble over there and then suddenly a big shoot of steam comes up on the other side of the path. It's this whole idea of it'll pop up in the most random ways if you don't give space for release. And something will trigger it that is not even related.
Yes.
But you'll explode over here and you'll realize, oh, it's not even related to the fact that my kid threw the spaghetti across the room again. It's actually related to the fact that I'm bottling up this thing. Or like, that grief and emotions actually. And you, Britt, made a space so that you could go, okay, I need to talk through this. I need to process this. And I think that's actually really important. It's important that our Christian community also, that we encourage one another to do it, but that we also recognize that we need that.
Yes, definitely. And I think also I grew up with, my parents had actually experienced significant amounts of grief themselves in the loss of different people in their lives. And they never, ever dealt with it. Like, ever. And in fact, the message to me was, you experience as a child, like obviously this is not necessarily directly what they said, but this is what I took. You experience grief, never get over it. It never goes away. It's the worst thing that can happen to you. And they were so stuck in it, both of them. And I think totally different time of life. But for me, in having the twins, and I've gone to different therapists on and off over the years. I work in this industry. I really believe in the power of it. Like, I think it's a good thing to do. But again, the main message there would be, if it's interrupting your function, go see someone. It's not, you don't just have to go see someone to be like, is there anything I should deal with? Like, you can just deal with stuff with your friends and at home and with God quite adequately. But I remember saying to a therapist, like, the sign of an adult is that you don't feel anything. And she's like, sorry, what? And I've had to learn, because I did grow up in that environment where it was like, don't feel things, just get over it. And turns out I couldn't do it. And in becoming a Christian, actually, a massive part of my emotions opened up, because I experienced this love and this care and this total acceptance that only I could get through Christ. And it opened up a bit of it started a little crack at like 16, which began to just go into this big thing of like, sometimes I just have to feel things and they're really big and huge, but God is actually with me in that. So I don't have to be afraid of it.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm so with you. But I think that's the thing, actually, weirdly enough, by becoming a Christian, it's almost like you rest in, God really loves me and I'm not going anywhere, and I can feel the things and say the things, and there's like this spaciousness that you're like, I can bring all of my emotions and admit them to you. I'm like, process them with you. So then like, it's this beautiful resource to then be able to share that with someone else, be like, God is teaching me this, and he's not accusing me that you feel these things. He's criticizing me, but he takes into with you. You don't need to do this on your own.
Yeah.
I can definitely see that in my life too, where it's not like the pain goes away. Like, you guys aren't dismissing the fact that it's not like when you became Christian, you stopped suffering either. Britt, you showed us one of the quotes from A Grief Observed, and one of them was like, we're actually guaranteed suffering in our life. It's part of living in a broken world. That's one of the things that the Bible actually guarantees. Not wealth, not comfort, not like physical comforts, but the suffering. And I know that even in my experience, we had some relational stuff in our family that I'm the only Christian in my family, and I've been able to process and have reconciliation, some of our relationships that some of the other people in my family just haven't. And it's impacted their relationships in a way that I think that Christ's work in my life by his Spirit has enabled certain emotions and certain processing to happen, and forgiveness and reconciliation, and even a personal understanding of my own sin in those relationships too, which has been really helpful for overcoming certain grief and suffering and going, yeah, that suffering happened. It happened. And not needing to hold that. But I was also thinking, as you were speaking, Britt, as well, was about 2 Corinthians is a letter that Paul writes, and he's writing it. You can tell that he's relationally hurting, like he's grieving the fact that, he's having some difficulties with the Corinthians. There's conflict there. But he also starts his letter with something that's really helpful, that he's talking about the God of all comfort. He says, "Praise be to God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ." It goes on. So please read 2 Corinthians. That's a great one. Just a shout out to all the people listening. 2 Corinthians is a good one.
Get on it.
Yes. Well, neat. I just read that earlier and I thought, Christ is with us in our stress, in our suffering. Christ himself suffered. He wept at the death of Lazarus. He grieved all sense of loss, and he physically suffered, literally gave up his entire self in order to save us. And so he's familiar with suffering. We don't need to shy away from it or be ashamed of it. He always provides comfort. Just so encouraging.
I find the Christian framework so useful for even making sense of suffering and grief, in that there's no sense that it is your fault when these things happen. I mean, obviously, relational conflict, there is sin in the world, and we do take a part in that quite a lot of the time. But there also are scenarios that do not make sense and are not our fault and are part of living in a fallen world. And the Bible's pretty open about suffering being a part of our journey on earth, that we should expect it, because we're not exempt just because we are Christians.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found this Bible verse that I was reading this morning, and I think it's just that we can't control that these things happen, but it's out like the Bible is really like, but we can eventually choose how we respond. Because so it's in Psalm 73, and it says, verse 21, so it goes, "When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you." But then it goes, "I am always with you, and you hold me by my right hand." And I just think, it's like God holding you like a little child, like a toddler, just being like, I love you and I'm with you in this, and I also love you too much to let you keep going like this. Like, grieve with me. Don't go away on your own.
Yeah. Just coming back to that, A Grief Observed, again, highly recommend. But C.S. Lewis says in it, we were promised sufferings. They were part of the program. We were even told, blessed are they that mourn. And I accept it.
Yeah.
I've got nothing that I hadn't bargained for. Of course, it is different when the thing happens to oneself, not to others, and in reality, not imagination, which I think just really sums up that suffering being a part of our experience on earth. And there are differences in our experiences. Like, not everyone is going to experience the loss of close loved ones or a partner or any of those things, but some of us will. And I think as a church, we need to think about, how do we care for others in that suffering when it happens, rather than thinking it won't happen?
Yeah, there's another a really helpful resource that I've read. It's called Letters to Emma. And it's a book by Lee Carter. It's written by a woman on the East Coast. And she talks about her experience of her loss of her husband. And it's just letters to her friend trying to explain her grief. She just articulates it because she effectively can't verbally articulate it. So she's processing it through her letters. She's shared it because it's been helpful for someone who's reading it and knows someone who's grieving or themselves is grieving. And yeah, she had really helpful tips of things that helped in community and things that didn't help, which was also good. But yeah, it raises questions like any kind of loss or grief always raises questions of purpose. It makes you a bit more aware of your mortality. And, and we actually do is death and loss is a reality of our life around us. And so having a really good understanding of what the Bible actually says about death, what the Bible says about loss, what the Bible says about the age to come and the hope. And I guess also equipping ourselves with kind of an understanding of what it is to live in Christian community. Because how do we love people well when people are grieving deeply and we don't often know how to engage? Sometimes it's uncomfortable to sit in the feelings, but it's also sometimes uncomfortable to approach someone who's sitting in those feelings and know what the right thing is to do. And
yes,
all they need is presence and knowing that you're there.
Yeah, I mean, I used to work with a lady who used to work in the rehabs, and she said something that always stuck with me, where she just said, hurt people hurt people. And I think there is sometimes that sense of flow, and that when we are hurting, we hurt the people close to us.
Yeah.
And, and I'm grief. But I think the other thing that I think we have as a resource that and I think you were touching on this, Maddy, is that in the secular world, there's nothing like the church. You can suffer in community. You have people around you, and sometimes, I think, some of the worst thing is to suffer alone. There's no one even trying to say the wrong thing or turning up with a terrible. There is not one. Yeah, what a gift that you have the church who are trying and doing it imperfectly, and sometimes doing all the wrong things, but they are trying. And the last thing, I really like the idea, and I remember Rory Shiner used to talk about it. He was like, it's good to think about suffering and have a good theology of suffering before you suffer. Yeah. Because I read this quote, and I think Tim Keller quoted it, and I have no idea where he pulled it from, but he was like, everything difficult is making us, it's basically making us question our theory of life, because it's more difficult than what our current theory embraces. I think actually a really good investment is being what do I actually think about evil and suffering and grief? So when they do come, you're not knocked off.
Yeah.
Otherwise, maybe it's his house to kill the rough.
Yeah.
Because grief can absolutely derail someone's Christian faith. Especially if you don't have a firm foundation of what suffering actually is, how the Bible and how God speaks into our suffering. So yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about these things, even if you're not someone who's grieving or suffering at the moment, because guarantee someone someone next to you at church is going to be suffering.
And I also think when we're thinking about broader senses of grief, not just an obvious loss, someone has actually died, but just the grief and loss that we experience as we go through life. What I have learnt from experiencing grief is to lean in and name it. I'm quite happy to say, look, I'm so sorry. That must be so hard. Or how are you managing that? Is that all right? And not just in a therapy session where obviously you're going to be more explicit in your discussion around grief, but just in my everyday discussions with friends and family and thinking about their experiences and what it all means. People are making sense of things all the time, and it can be helpful to reframe it, to encourage them even, to read the Psalms or to read Corinthians or whatever it might be, and consider how God is with us in these moments.
And God invites us to talk about that ugliness of grief too. And so I think it's really helpful to be able to do that side by side with one another and have people you feel safe. Some people, they're dealing with anger when there's a grief. They're I'm angry. That's an emotion that's also dealt with in the Psalms. Let's pray through that. Let's pray about it. Let's talk about it. And it's actually like, you're not a failed Christian if you feel those emotions either.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty natural.
Yeah. It's better to wrestle with than to try and pretend it's not there.
Yeah, absolutely.
To pretend it's not there.
Yeah, says the therapist.
It's those heads though, like when you're at time zone and you're whacking the crocodile heads. Whack 'em. It's keeping coming up.
Yep. The only way out is through.
Yeah.
It's true.
Look, a really helpful resource that I had that I think I mentioned in my interview was the Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy by Mark Vrogrip. And that is really helpfful for using the Psalms to lament, to learn to just be like, this absolutely sucks, or like, God, why? Why is it like this? But also to reframe and structure your prayers in that, yeah, actually you do care about this. And you do into this. And you love me deeply, and this pain does not define me or even take away your comfort from me. Because to Romans 8, 38, 39, nothing will separate us from the love of Christ. Not even those ugly emotions.
Yeah.
We need to work through them, and we need to pray through them. We need to talk to people. And sometimes we can't pray through them, but we need someone to pray for us.
Yeah.
The thing that helped me was going, I need you to pray through this because I just can't articulate it. So,
have you guys read that book? Is it Any Prayer, Any Time? Those kids' book.
Oh yeah, the little book.
Yeah. There's a page at the back, and it talks about and when you can I could never read this to my kids without crying for so long. But it's like when you don't have words to say and all you can do is groan, God still hears you. I always found that so encouraging because it's like, actually, I don't have the words. I have nothing to say. I can groan at you. That is all I have. But you hear me and you know me, and it's such a comfort.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, knows us better than we do. Knows what we need.
Yeah.
So my final question for you guys, how has sitting with grief shaped your life?
I think it's hard to quantify. And I know that we talked about this a lot, Britt, but really reflecting on it, I've spent 15 years in kind of basically hardcore trauma settings. I've sat with a lot of grieving people. And I'm more and more conscious that it's the most important thing we can do is to show up. But I'm also more and more convinced that I'm not great at it. I don't know. And I think people assume because you're a therapist, you're good at it and you're naturally really empathetic and you go around feeling empathetic all the time.
Oh, yeah.
It takes emotional work to sit with someone who is grieving and sit with them and feel the same thing and be like, oh, we are grieving that loss that you had this and it's not coming back. Or the future that you hoped for is not there and it's not going to be, you know what I mean? And it's not going to look like what you thought it's going to be. And I think it has in some ways probably amplified a natural, quite a sensitive personality. And it's probably amplified that. I'm like, oh, yeah, grief can come anytime. You're always listening for what's not said. But I have also really come to wrestle with recently, maybe in some of the ways that I have served and tried to love people in that way and be present. I'm like, have I done that out of my own strength and tried to white knuckle that, or have I done that out of God's strength? Because I notice that I'm much more peaceful and less distressed when I do it out of God's strength.
Yeah.
I am growing more convicted that I'm like, God has given us the church. The church is a great and beautiful gift. It's not perfect. Friendships are a gift. Even if you go to therapy, it's only an hour a week. You might get 10 sessions. It is not a cure-all.
No.
And for the people who are there being hey, I'm here and I'm listening, I would do 2 days of therapy and then go home and go to sleep. I would do a day of therapy and be like, I need to sleep. I need to immediately go to bed. And I'm like, God has made me with limits for my good. I am not all sufficient. You know what I mean? I'm not all sufficient. I get tired. I get grumpy. I think it's a good work to do, but I was like, I am not indispensable. I am not God. I 100% have limits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, grief has shaped my life in allowing me the gift of experiencing the fullness of my own emotional experience, the good and the bad. Like experiencing the lows helps me experience the highs. And I also do feel extremely grateful for the gift of stable mental health. Like I haven't experienced depression as a full-on episode. And I think that is very difficult. But the peaks of grief that I've experienced where, particularly around anniversaries, I experienced for like a couple of days, I feel like I'm walking through water again. And it feels like what I imagine depression might feel like on an ongoing basis. But I am very grateful to God for kind of a stable mental state. So I don't feel like when I sit with people's grief as a therapist that I have to take it on, because I just know that I'm not God. And I think that foundation of being like, I can't do it on my own for myself. I definitely can't do it on my own for these people. And it's like what you're talking about, like doing it in God's strength and trusting in the person and in the resources and also in the systems around them. Because an hour a week, I'm not going to radically change anyone's life. But where they have other resources and you help them build that up, that can be a powerful thing, I think. So I think it's helped me to be willing to sit with others. Like I'm willing to sit with them in a way that perhaps I would have avoided previously.
Yeah.
And then in my own personal life, I don't know, I feel like it's given me a way to see grief in all of its forms, not just like the loss of a person or whatever it might be, or a pet or, oh yeah, I get that. Yeah, okay, yeah, that is really hard. Like I can empathize with it again I don't feel like I have to be feeling it myself to empathize with it, if that makes sense. Probably because I have experienced it. I'm like, I just get it. I get what you're talking about. Yeah, so to me, grief has shaped me probably very significantly in opening me up in a way, but I really see that as such a gift from God to give that to me. Otherwise, it probably was just avoiding. And I think also the process of kind of working in therapy obviously does that to you, because you have to look at your own stuff, because when you're sitting with people every week, your own stuff gets triggered and you need to go sort that out. Like,
Yeah, you're like,
you can't.
you seem so like irritable or like, why is this really getting to me when 10 other people with the same issue doesn't distress me?
Yeah, it doesn't affect
I need to I need to look at this and I need to deal with this.
I think it's reminded me that it's actually being a Christian doesn't necessarily mean not feeling grief, sadness, suffering. It doesn't mean that you don't feel those things. It feels like it's brought to light the reality of my broken world more and more, and how much we need Jesus. I feel like that's what it's been for me in a big way. And it's actually helped me when I'm coming alongside other people in pastoral ministry to remember to just never dismiss those kinds of feelings either. Like, I remember one person saying, and this is I'm going to admit this, that when I was quite young, I said something like, oh, have you been praying about it? Or have you been, and the person felt really dismissed, and they felt like I wasn't acknowledging that that was an okay feeling for them to have. And so I really appreciated them sharing that feedback with me when I was young, because I remembered that, if I was going through grief and then someone was saying to me, but you just need to pray more, or do not be anxious about anything, but just trust in Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, very great Bible verses, but it doesn't just putting those, context, just throwing those out doesn't acknowledge the reality of our world. So it's helped me remember this world is not all there is. We look to the age. And that grief and loss and brokenness is a very real reality of this world. And so it means I'm not surprised as much when awful things happen. I feel like God just shapes and readies you with grief for more grief or loss or whatever.
Yeah.
And reminds me that I need to talk about it and have people in my life that if I'm going, this is really hard and I feel like I should be able to cope with this, but I'm not coping with this. Those safe people in my life that I can talk to, they can just pray with me and listen. They don't have to say anything. But that's how I feel like it's shaped my life. And I'm so grateful for it, because I just never have learned that otherwise. Yeah.
And And I think also sometimes when we give kind of more Band-Aid responses to people in their grief of like, in our mind, we're encouraging them. Sometimes it's actually about we don't feel comfortable. Like we want to fix it. And so when we really can acknowledge that God is truly the only one that can, we don't feel as much pressure to make everything better. We can just be like, yeah, that is really hard.
Yeah.
Like life is not what you expected it to be. And that is so hard. And God has not abandoned you in that, but he gets that it's hard. And you don't have to like wrap it up in a bow. You can just let it be. It is what it is. It's hard. It's just sad.
Yeah. But it's sad. It doesn't win. It's not going to be like,
It doesn't win. Yeah.
Doesn't win.
Well, and also I think like the sad things in life feel sad because they are sad, not because you're doing it wrong.
No.
It's like, it's just how it is.
Sad's are sad.
If you just bought my Instagram course, you would stop feeling so sad because you're doing grief wrong.
Yeah. No course, people. Does anyone have any grief? Yeah. Comment grief and I'll give you my $5,000 course. So do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anything you want to say?
Look, I would just say if you're going through grief or loss, like if anyone listening is, just please don't be afraid to articulate it or talk to a trusted Christian that you know. Christian community is really helpful and really important, and God gives us an amazing gift of one another. So please reach out to others, help them to process alongside you, and sometimes just articulate what you need from them. Hey, come be in my house, a bit like what you needed, Britt.
Yeah.
Come be in my house. Just be present. I don't really want to talk about it, but can you be here? And so don't be afraid of doing that because God's people do love one another. We want to serve one another. So I would just encourage anyone listening to do that.
And I would encourage you that it's okay to be awkward. Just,
Yeah.
how are you doing? Be like, how are you doing with your grief? Like, how are things going?
Yeah.
And I want to talk about it. And you'd be like, okay. But they might be happy that someone asked. You might be like, can I bring you a meal? And they might be like, I have heaps of meals. Be like, okay. But at least you did the thing.
Yeah. Dignity of risk. Ask them and then they know if they want to, but you've asked.
That's it from us, friends. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, you can sign up to our free weekly newsletter called Stories I Tell You at Dinner. So you get essays, poetry, podcast episodes, everything, photo essays straight to your inbox on Wednesdays from March through to November from Christian women in Western Australia. If you'd like that, the link is in the show notes. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye.